All right, so if you're watching this, you're probably a Dexter fan. And if you're a Dexter fan, you probably already know the basics. You know about the plastic wrap, you know about the kill room, you know about the code of Harry. But here's what I'm willing to bet you don't know. Across 8 seasons, 96 episodes, 3 spin-off series, and over 126 total episodes in the franchise, the creators of Dexter hid literally hundreds of Easter eggs, callbacks, behind-the-scenes secrets, and insane little details that the vast majority of viewers completely missed. And tonight, we're going to go through 100 of them, one by one, nice and easy. So get comfortable, get cozy, grab your blanket, do whatever you need to do, because we're going to be here for a while. And honestly, if you fall asleep somewhere around fact number 47, I'm not going to be offended. That's kind of the whole point. But I will say this. The very first Easter egg we're starting with tonight is one that, once you know about it, will change the way you watch the entire series. Because there is a number hidden throughout Dexter. It shows up on hotel room doors. It shows up on radio stations. It shows up in courtrooms, on clocks, in Bible passages, and even on a character's birthday. And once I tell you what that number is and what it means, you will never be able to unsee it. So let's get into it. The number is 103, or, written out the way it matters, 10-3. October 3rd. That date, October 3rd, 1973, is the single most important date in the entire Dexter universe. It's the date that a newspaper in Miami published an article about the brutal murder of a woman named Laura Moser inside a cargo shipping container down at the ports. Laura was killed by drug dealers working for a kingpin named Hector Estrada. She was a confidential informant for a police officer named Harry Morgan, and she was also secretly Harry's lover. When the dealers found out Laura had been feeding information to the cops, they took her and her 2 young sons to a shipping yard, locked them all inside a metal container, and murdered her with a chainsaw right in front of her children. Those 2 boys, covered in their mother's blood, sat in that container for 2 days before police found them. Harry Morgan was the officer who walked into that container. He rescued the younger boy and adopted him as his own son. That boy's name was Dexter. The older boy, Brian, was sent to a psychiatric facility in Tampa Bay. He would eventually grow up to become the Ice Truck Killer, the central villain of Season 1. Now here's where the Easter egg comes in. Brian Moser, the Ice Truck Killer, spent the entire first season leaving clues specifically for Dexter. Not for the cops, not for Miami Metro, for Dexter. And the clues all revolved around that number, 103, October 3rd, the day their mother's death was reported. The day Dexter's dark passenger was born. In one episode, Brian spills blood inside room 103 at the Marina View Hotel. In that same room, he tunes the radio to 103 FM. He bookmarks the hotel Bible to a very specific passage, Leviticus chapter 10, verse 3. And later, he sets the clock at a place called Santa's Cottage to exactly 1:03 p.m. All of these clues were designed to jog Dexter's repressed memories of that day in the shipping container, and eventually they work. Dexter searches through old Miami Metro newspapers until he finds the article dated October 3rd, 1973, and everything clicks. He finally remembers who he is, where he came from, and what made him this way. But here's the thing that most people miss. The number 103 doesn't stop appearing after Season 1. It keeps showing up throughout the entire series, hiding in plain sight like a scar that never fully heals. And I'm going to walk you through every major appearance right now because they're all really cool once you know what to look for. In Season 3, there's a scene where Dexter and Miguel Prado, the assistant district attorney played by Jimmy Smits, walk into a courtroom together. This is the episode where they agree to become partners in vigilante killing. The courtroom number on the door is 103. Of all the courtroom numbers they could have used, they chose that one. And considering what that partnership eventually leads to, it's a really dark little detail. Moving on to Season 8, Dexter takes on a young apprentice named Zach Hamilton. Zach is a photographer, and when Dexter walks into Zach's photography studio for the first time, the camera shows the studio number on the door. It's 301. Now, 301 doesn't mean anything on its own. But if you read it backwards, which is exactly how the camera frames it as Dexter walks through the door, it's 103. The show's creators put this number in reverse, like a mirror image, for the scene where Dexter is training someone new to follow in his footsteps. That's not an accident, that's very deliberate visual storytelling, and this is where it gets even wilder. Remember Sergeant James Dokes, the guy who spent 2 seasons convinced that Dexter was hiding something? The guy Dexter eventually framed as the Bay Harbor Butcher? Well, Dokes' birthday, according to official show records, is March 10th, 1962. Now in American date format, that's 3/10. But in British date format, which writes the day before the month, it reads as 10/3, 103. The man who came closest to exposing Dexter's secret, the man who was falsely labeled a serial killer in Dexter's place, shares the cursed number. Whether that's a coincidence or not is up to you, but given how carefully the writers planted 103 everywhere else, I really don't think it is. Even Dexter's own apartment number plays into this. He lives in apartment 10B. Not exactly 103, but that 10 prefix is always lurking. Fans on Reddit have debated this one for years, and some people think it's intentional while others think it's a stretch. I'll let you decide, but the fact that this conversation even exists tells you how deep the 103 rabbit hole goes. And if you thought the original series was the end of this Easter egg, think again. Because the number came back in Dexter Resurrection, the most recent installment in the franchise. In the Season 1 finale of Resurrection, there's a scene where Dexter needs to crack the code to a villain's vault, and Dexter's instinct is to try a date. A death date, specifically. Because as Dexter explains, there are certain dates you never forget. Dates that define who you are. And of course, for Dexter, the date that defined everything was October 3rd, 1973. The writers brought the 103 Easter egg full circle, from a hotel room in Season 1 all the way to a vault combination in Resurrection, nearly 20 years later. That is some incredible long-term storytelling. Now let's talk about the shipping container itself for a second, because it's worth pausing on. That cargo container where Laura Moser was murdered is probably the single most recreated location in the entire franchise. It appeared in flashbacks throughout Seasons 1 through 4 of the original series, usually in quick, traumatic flashes that showed young Dexter sitting in a pool of blood. It was then fully recreated in stunning detail in Episode 8 of Dexter Original Sin, the prequel series that came out in late 2024. In that episode, we see the events leading up to the massacre in real time. Laura, Dexter, and Brian are ambushed and taken to the shipyard. They're locked in the container with other victims, and on Hector Estrada's orders, a man named Santos Jimenez begins dismembering people with a chainsaw. Laura tries to cover her children's eyes, but young Dexter looks on, wide-eyed, absorbing every moment of violence. It's genuinely one of the most disturbing scenes in the entire franchise, and it's made even heavier when you realize that Christian Slater, who plays young Harry Morgan in Original Sin, perfectly captures the same devastated expression that James Remar showed as Harry in the original series flashbacks. Different actors, but the same heartbreak on their faces when Harry walks into that container and picks up young Dexter. While we're on the subject of Season 1 symbolism, let me give you one more detail that ties this whole section together. After Dexter kills Brian at the end of Season 1, the police search Brian's apartment. Among the evidence, they find a vinyl record. The song on the record is called Born Free, and the finale episode itself is titled Born Free. It's a double meaning. On one level, it's Brian's message to Dexter, saying that they were born free from the constraints of normal human emotion, born in blood, born different. On another level, it's the show telling us that Dexter is now free from his brother's influence and can chart his own path. It's a really elegant piece of writing when you think about it. And the last Easter egg in this opening section is one that's easy to miss, because it's a line of dialogue rather than a visual clue. In the very first season, Harry tells Dexter that the keys to survival are, and I'm paraphrasing here, secrecy, self-reliance, and a well-stocked cupboard of hefty bags. That line is played almost like a joke, but it becomes the unofficial motto of the Code of Harry. It gets referenced and echoed across multiple seasons. Harry says versions of it in flashbacks. Dexter repeats it to himself in moments of crisis. It's one of those phrases that seems throwaway the first time you hear it, but it's actually the foundational philosophy of the entire show packed into one sentence. Secrecy, self-reliance, hefty bags. That's Dexter Morgan in 6 words. Okay, so that was our first batch, 10 Easter eggs and facts, and we're just getting started. We've got 90 more to go, so settle in. And if you're already getting sleepy, that's totally fine. Just let my voice do its thing and we'll keep rolling through these. Let's move on to the next set because this one involves a very unexpected crossover between Dexter and a show you would never ever expect to be connected to a series about a serial killer. I'm talking about The Office. So in season 6 of Dexter, there's an episode called The Angel of Death. It's episode 5, an F. And in this episode, Dexter is examining evidence related to the Doomsday Killers, specifically a pair of angel wings that were left at a crime scene. He suspects the wings were repaired with an unusual type of glue, so he goes back to his desk at Miami Metro and prints out a chemical breakdown of the glue composition. Normal day at the office for a forensic analyst. But eagle-eyed viewers notice something about the printer sitting on Dexter's desk. It was a Sabre printer. And if you've ever watched The Office, that name should ring a very loud bell. Sabre is the fictional technology company from The Office that bought Dunder Mifflin in season 6 of that show. They're the ones who made those cheap printers that Andy proved could catch fire. The same brand of printer that caused so much chaos in Scranton, Pennsylvania is sitting right there in the Miami Metro Homicide Department next to a serial killer. Fans lost their minds over this. It became one of the most discussed Easter eggs in both shows' histories. Now, the most popular theory that came out of this is that Dexter and The Office take place in the same fictional universe. A Reddit user named Piker10 was one of the first to point it out, and the theory quickly spiraled from there. People started connecting the dots. Sabre is headquartered in Tallahassee, Florida. Dexter works in Miami, Florida. It makes geographic sense that a Florida police department would have a Florida company's printer. And then fans took it one step further, suggesting that Dexter could theoretically be the Scranton Strangler, the mysterious serial killer mentioned multiple times in The Office who was never definitively identified. Think about it. A serial killer who operates in secret, never gets caught by local police, and has connections to the same corporate infrastructure. The theory is absolutely wild, but people genuinely ran with it. Now, the boring but probably accurate explanation is that Sabre is most likely just a cleared prop brand name. Kind of like Morley Cigarettes, which is a fictional cigarette brand that has appeared in everything from The X-Files to Psycho to Malcolm in the Middle. When a TV show needs a product on screen but doesn't want to deal with trademark issues, they use a pre-approved fake brand. Sabre printers also show up in Parks and Recreation in the season 4 episode Meet and Greet, which just adds more fuel to the shared universe theory. But in reality, all 3 shows probably just use the same legally vetted prop. Still though, the Dexter Office connection is way more fun to think about, so I'm going to let you keep that one in your head as you fall asleep tonight. Okay, let's shift gears from cross-show Easter eggs to some really cool references that the Dexter writers embedded into the show's DNA, starting with one of my favorites. In the original series, Dexter uses a fake name at one point to order a drug called M99, which is the animal tranquilizer he uses to sedate his victims before bringing them to the kill room. The name he gives is Patrick Bateman. Now, if you know your serial killer fiction, that name should immediately jump out at you. Patrick Bateman is the protagonist of Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho, and of course the character played by Christian Bale in the 2000 movie adaptation. He's a Wall Street investment banker by day and a sadistic serial killer by night, and the parallels to Dexter's double life are pretty obvious. Dexter is a mild-mannered forensic analyst by day and a ritualistic serial killer by night. Using the name Patrick Bateman as an alias is basically Dexter winking at the audience, or maybe winking at himself, acknowledging that he's part of a long tradition of fictional killers who hide behind a mask of normalcy. The American Psycho reference didn't stop with the original series. When Dexter Original Sin came out in late 2024, the prequel kept the reference alive in a really clever way. In the premiere episode, young Dexter is posing for a graduation photo. The photographer tells him to think of something that makes him happy so he'll smile for the camera. And instead of thinking about his family or his friends or anything a normal college student would think about, Dexter flashes to a mental image of a copy of American Psycho. That's the thing that makes him smile. A novel about a serial killer. It's both hilarious and deeply unsettling, and it confirms that even as a young man, Dexter was already fascinated by people like himself. Speaking of Original Sin, there's a scene in episode 1 where young Dexter is sitting on his bed looking through newspaper clippings of famous serial killers that he's collected and hidden inside a magazine. The clippings include names like Ted Bundy, the Night Stalker, and the BTK Killer. And as he's looking through them, his inner monologue, voiced by Michael C. Hall, reveals something fascinating. Young Dexter wonders if he's like these people. He wonders if anyone will ever give him a nickname the way they gave nicknames to these infamous killers. And of course, as fans of the show know, Dexter absolutely does get a nickname eventually. Once the police discover his underwater body dump in Season 2, they coin the name the Bay Harbor Butcher. So that moment in Original Sin, where a 20-year-old Dexter idly wonders about getting a killer nickname, is foreshadowing something that won't happen for another 15 years in the show's timeline. That's a really fun detail for longtime fans. Now here's one that sounds small, but is actually a beautiful piece of character continuity. In the pilot episode of the original series, which aired on October 1st, 2006, we see Dexter bring a big box of donuts to Miami Metro. He does this every morning. It's part of his routine, part of his carefully constructed mask of normalcy. He brings donuts so people will see him as a nice, normal, friendly guy. Officer Deborah Morgan takes a donut. The desk officer takes a donut. Detectives crack jokes about the next bloodbath while grabbing donuts. It's a small moment, but it establishes something important about how Dexter navigates the world. He uses little acts of generosity to deflect suspicion and build social capital. Fast forward to Dexter Original Sin, and young Dexter does the exact same thing on his first day at Miami Metro. Same routine, same box of donuts, same strategic niceness. The fact that the prequel recreated this detail from the pilot 18 years later shows just how much attention to continuity Clyde Phillips and the writing team were paying. There's another small callback in Original Sin that I absolutely love. When young Dexter sits down at his desk at Miami Metro for the first time in the forensics lab, he settles into his chair and starts spinning around in it. Just spinning like a kid in a swivel chair. And longtime fans will instantly recognize this because adult Dexter did the same thing constantly throughout the original series. It was one of his tells, one of those little behaviors that made him seem playful and harmless to his coworkers. In reality, the spinning was Dexter barely containing his excitement at the thought of spending his days surrounded by blood evidence and crime scene photos. Seeing the young version of the character develop that same habit on day one is a really satisfying Easter egg. And the last one in this section is something that fans had debated for years before Original Sin finally settled it. Throughout the original series, Dexter mentions at various points that dogs don't seem to like him very much. He's not a dog person. Animals can sense something is off about him. This led to a long-running fan theory on Reddit that Dexter must be a cat person because cats are more independent, more predatory, and less likely to be put off by a human who radiates danger. Well, in Original Sin, the show confirmed this theory directly. Young Dexter admits through his inner monologue that he feels a special connection to cats because, as he puts it, they're nature's serial killers. They hunt for sport, they toy with their prey, they're perfectly designed predators who also happen to be adorable. And Dexter sees himself in that. It's a small moment of self-awareness that's equal parts funny and disturbing, and it's exactly the kind of detail that makes Dexter such a fascinating character. All right, that wraps up our second batch. We're 20 facts deep now, and we've still got 80 more to go. If you're still awake, nice, you're a trooper. If you've already drifted off, that's cool too. I'll be right here talking about Dexter either way. Let's move into our next section because this is where things get really interesting. We're going behind the scenes now. Production secrets, cast trivia, and some facts about how this show was actually made that are going to blow your mind. For example, did you know that during the filming of what most people consider the greatest season of Dexter ever made, the lead actor was secretly battling cancer? Yeah, let's talk about that. Season 4 of Dexter is, by pretty much every metric, the peak of the show. It's the Trinity Killer season. John Lithgow plays Arthur Mitchell, a deeply disturbing family man who has been secretly committing ritual murders for decades. The season finale, called The Getaway, holds a 9.8 out of 10 on IMDb, making it the highest-rated episode in the entire franchise. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing. It drew 2.6 million viewers, which was the most watched original series episode in Showtime history at that time. By any measure, Season 4 was Dexter at its absolute best. And during the filming of that season, Michael C. Hall, the actor who plays Dexter, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was battling cancer while delivering what is widely considered his finest performance on the show. The makeup and wardrobe departments worked to subtly mask his physical changes, but Hall never stopped showing up to set. He continued filming throughout his treatment, and his work that season earned him both the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor in a Television Drama and the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Male Actor in a Drama Series. He attended the Golden Globe ceremony in January of 2010 during his treatment. John Lithgow also won a Golden Globe that night for Best Supporting Actor, so the two of them walked away with matching trophies from the same season, which is pretty incredible. Hall's openness about his diagnosis was also praised by medical advocacy groups. His willingness to talk publicly about living with Hodgkin's lymphoma helped destigmatize the condition for a lot of people. It's one of those facts that makes you look at season 4 differently, knowing what the actor was going through while delivering that level of performance. Now, here's something that surprises a lot of people. Despite being nominated 5 times for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series at the Primetime Emmy Awards, Michael C. Hall never won an Emmy, not once. The show itself was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series 4 consecutive years, from season 2 through season 5, and it never won that category either. The show did win 4 Emmys total, including Outstanding Main Title Design in 2007 for that iconic opening sequence, Outstanding Single-Camera Picture Editing, Outstanding Directing for Steve Schill's work on The Getaway, and Outstanding Guest Actor for John Lithgow. But Hall himself, despite being the face of the franchise for over a decade, was never handed that particular trophy. The Golden Globe and the SAG Award, yes. The Emmy, never. Let's talk about where the show was actually filmed, because this one catches people off guard every time. Dexter is set in Miami, Florida. The entire show revolves around Miami's culture, its heat, its colors, its energy. But the vast majority of the original series was not filmed in Miami. It was filmed in and around Los Angeles, California. Specifically, a residential neighborhood in Long Beach called Los Altos served as the primary stand-in for Miami. The area has pastel-colored houses, palm tree-lined streets, and just enough of that warm, tropical vibe to pass for South Florida on camera. The pilot episode was partially shot in actual Miami, and certain establishing shots throughout the series used real Miami locations, including the Bay Harbor Islands area for exterior shots of Dexter's apartment building. But the day-to-day filming was almost entirely LA. Dexter New Blood, on the other hand, was filmed in a real small town. The fictional town of Iron Lake, New York, was actually shot in Shelburne Falls, a village in Franklin County, Massachusetts. So you've got the original series faking Miami in LA, and the sequel series using a real Northeast town for a fictional one. 2 very different approaches. Here's a fun production fact about the pilot. The very first episode of Dexter was filmed during what might have been the worst possible hurricane season in recent memory. Production was disrupted by 3 separate hurricanes, Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, all during the 2005 filming period. That's 3 major hurricanes while you're trying to shoot a television pilot. The production had to deal with relocations and insurance issues, which is a pretty wild origin story for a show that went on to become one of the most successful dramas in cable television history. Speaking of the pilot, there's a visual detail about season 1 that most people don't notice unless they have a really good eye for cinematography. Season 1 was shot on 35mm film. Actual film, not digital. This gave the first season a grittier, more saturated texture compared to later seasons. Starting with season 2, the production switched exclusively to digital cameras, which resulted in a cleaner, smoother look. If you go back and rewatch the first season after watching the later ones, you'll notice the difference. Season 1 has a slightly more raw, almost cinematic quality that the digital seasons don't quite match. It's not better or worse, just different. But it's one of those production choices that quietly shaped how the show felt during its most formative year. Now let's talk money for a second, because Michael C. Hall's salary trajectory over the course of the show is kind of staggering. He started at $295,000 per episode for the first 6 seasons. That's already a lot of money, obviously, but by seasons 7 and 8, his compensation had more than doubled to $830,000 per episode. Over the entire original run, Hall earned a total payout of over $41 million. Jennifer Carpenter, who played Deborah Morgan, also saw her salary increase significantly, reaching an estimated $300,000 per episode in the final seasons. The show was able to absorb these costs because it didn't rely on expensive CGI or massive action sequences. Dexter was always a character-driven thriller, and the relatively contained production allowed the budget to go toward talent. Another production detail that fans of the franchise have noticed is the changing aspect ratios across different eras of the show. The original series was broadcast in standard 16:9 widescreen, which was the norm for HD television at the time. But when Dexter New Blood premiered in 2021, it switched to ultra-wide 21:9, which creates those black bars at the top and bottom of your screen. This was a deliberate choice to give the revival a more cinematic, prestige television feel. Dexter Original Sin used yet another ratio, 18:9, and Dexter Resurrection went back to 21:9. It's a small detail, but if you watch all 4 shows back-to-back, you'll notice the frame literally changing shape between eras. Some fans loved the wider look, others found it distracting, but it's a conscious creative decision that signals to the viewer that each new chapter of the franchise is visually distinct. One of the most significant behind-the-scenes facts about Dexter is the showrunner change that many fans believe directly caused the show's decline in quality. Clyde Phillips was the showrunner for seasons 1 through 4, the era universally considered the show's golden age. After season 4, Phillips departed. Chip Johannesson took over for season 5, and then Scott Buck ran seasons 6 through 8. Under Buck's leadership, the show's critical reception dropped dramatically. Season 6 holds a 38% on Rotten Tomatoes. Season 8, the final season, sits at 35%. The series finale is one of the lowest rated episodes in television history on IMDb. But here's the thing, when it came time to bring Dexter back for New Blood, and then for Original Sin, and then for Resurrection, the producers brought Clyde Phillips back as showrunner for all of them. So the man who built the show's golden age came back to try to rebuild the franchise after someone else had, in many fans' eyes, run it into the ground. Whether or not he succeeded is a debate for another video, but the fact that Phillips returned is itself a kind of Easter egg for longtime fans who always knew those first 4 seasons were special. Here's a fact that speaks to how massive Dexter was during its peak years. At one point, the show was described as the most rented DVD box set in Netflix history. This was back in the era before streaming, when Netflix was primarily a DVD by mail service. People were literally lining up to rent Dexter DVDs to the point where it outpaced every other show on the platform. That tells you a lot about how much word-of-mouth buzz the show generated, especially during seasons 2 through 4. While we're on the subject of the show's reach, let me tell you about the merchandise side of things because it was pretty extensive. Dexter generated a massive range of licensed products during its peak years. Companies like Biff Bang Pow and Sideshow Collectibles produced highly detailed 1/6 scale action figures of Dexter in his kill room gear. There were bobbleheads, including variants like the Dark Defender, which was the superhero alter ego Dexter imagined for himself in one of the more memorable Season 2 episodes. There were replica blood spatter slide boxes, essentially recreations of Dexter's trophy collection that fans could buy and display on their shelves. There was apparel, prop recreations, and collector's edition DED box sets that came in distinctive wooden slide box packaging designed to look like Dexter's blood slide collection. The commercial merchandising arm was lucrative enough that it became a significant revenue stream beyond the show itself. It's one of those things that speaks to how deeply the character penetrated popular culture. People didn't just watch Dexter, they wanted to own pieces of his world, even the disturbing parts. Especially the disturbing parts, if we're being honest. And speaking of companion content, Showtime produced official podcasts during both the original run and the revival era. The Dexter Wrap-Up podcast aired during the original series and featured interviews with the cast, writers, and producers as they dissected each episode. When New Blood came along, a new version was launched, hosted by executive producer Scott Reynolds, offering behind-the-scenes insights and story breakdowns. These podcasts gave fans a deeper connection to the creative process and often revealed small details about character motivations and production decisions that weren't obvious from just watching the episodes. It's worth tracking them down if you want to go even deeper into the franchise than we're going tonight, which is saying something because we're already pretty deep. The show also maintained a regular presence at San Diego Comic-Con throughout its original run, which was unusual for a premium cable drama at the time. Comic-Con was primarily associated with sci-fi, fantasy, and comic book properties, but Dexter carved out a space for itself in that world, attracting panels, exclusive footage reveals, and fan events. The franchise expansion announcement for Resurrection was even made at Comic-Con on July 26, 2024. The fact that a show about a forensic analyst who kills people in his spare time became a Comic-Con staple says a lot about how Dexter transcended its genre. It wasn't just a crime drama, it was a phenomenon that belonged alongside superhero movies and space operas, in the conversation about which fictional characters people are most passionate about. Here's another piece of the franchise's history that deserves mention. The show's entire run was produced by a constellation of production companies, including the Colleton Company, John Goldwyn Productions, Clyde Phillips Productions, and others. Over the years, as the franchise expanded, additional production entities joined the credits, including Counterpart Studios and Paramount Television Studios. This is standard for long-running shows, but the interesting part is that each of these companies brought different perspectives and resources to the table at different points in the franchise's life. The transition from Showtime as the sole platform to the Paramount Plus with Showtime streaming model also reflects broader industry shifts that have reshaped how television is produced and distributed. Dexter started as a traditional weekly cable show in 2006 and has evolved into a streaming franchise in 2025. Its episodes could run anywhere from 45 to 66 minutes depending on the season and the episode's position within the season arc. Finales tended to run longer, premiere episodes were often extended, and mid-season episodes could be shorter. The pilot specifically was approximately 53 minutes. This flexibility was one of the advantages of being on premium cable. Unlike network television, where episodes have to fit into rigid time slots with commercial breaks, Showtime gave the Dexter writers the freedom to let episodes be as long or as short as the story required. It's a small thing, but it contributed to the show's cinematic feel and its ability to pace emotional beats without rushing. And while we're talking about distribution, here's a weird piece of Dexter history that a lot of people don't know about. During the 2007 through 2008 Writers Guild of America strike, CBS decided to fill its schedule by airing heavily edited versions of Dexter Season 1 on network television. These episodes started airing on February 17, 2008, and they were cut to earn a TV-14 rating, which meant removing most of the graphic violence and language. This was a pretty big deal at the time because Dexter was a premium cable show about a serial killer, and suddenly it was airing on free broadcast television between sitcoms and procedurals. The Parents Television Council protested loudly, arguing that putting a show about a sympathetic serial killer on public airwaves was irresponsible and harmful. It's one of those only in Hollywood moments where a confluence of circumstances, a writer's strike, empty time slots, a hit show on a sister network, led to something that probably shouldn't have happened but absolutely did. Let me give you two more quick facts before we move on. First, Dexter received a Peabody Award, which is one of the most prestigious honors in broadcast journalism and entertainment. The show was also selected by the American Film Institute as one of the 10 best television programs of the year in both 2006 and 2007. These are the kinds of accolades that don't get talked about as much as Emmy wins, but they speak to the level of craft that went into the show's early seasons. Second, the iconic opening title sequence, the one where Dexter's morning routine of making breakfast, shaving, and getting dressed is filmed to look like a horror movie, won the Emmy for Outstanding Main Title Design in 2007. Composer Rolf Kent created the main title theme, and that piece of music remained completely unchanged across all 8 seasons and 96 episodes of the original run. They never remixed it, never updated it, never swapped it out for something modern. It stayed the same from the pilot to the finale, and the show's score was composed by Daniel Licht, who created the eerie, Latin-influenced instrumental tracks that defined the franchise's sound. Licht scored the entire original run and New Blood before his passing, after which Pat Irwin took over composing duties for Resurrection. All right, that's 35 facts down. We're over a third of the way through, which is a good time to take a breath. Or, close your eyes for a minute. I'm not going anywhere. We've got a lot more to cover, and the next section is one that the die-hard fans are going to love, because we're diving into all the Easter eggs and callbacks hidden inside Dexter Original Sin, the prequel series that showrunner Clyde Phillips literally described as, and I'm quoting him here, a whole Easter egg hunt. Let's get into it. Dexter Original Sin premiered in December of 2024 on Paramount Plus with Showtime. And from the very first episode, it was clear that this show was made by people who loved the original series and wanted to reward fans who had been watching for nearly 2 decades. Showrunner Clyde Phillips told The Hollywood Reporter directly, "If people like Easter eggs, this show is an Easter egg hunt." He also said, and this is a great quote, "We had this canon of lore from 9 seasons of the show from which to draw, and they drew from it heavily." Original Sin is set in 1991 Miami, following a young Dexter played by Patrick Gibson as he transitions from medical school student to forensic intern at Miami Metro, guided by his adoptive father Harry Morgan, now played by Christian Slater. Michael C. Hall returns to voice the iconic inner monologue, and woven throughout every single episode are references, callbacks, and Easter eggs that connect the prequel to the original series in ways both big and small. Let me walk you through the best ones. The first thing returning fans noticed was the opening title sequence. Original Sin uses the exact same theme song composed by Rolf Kent, the one we just talked about that remained unchanged for 96 episodes. But the prequel extends the opening montage to include Harry and Deborah as part of the morning routine visual, adding a family dimension to the original concept. And the mosquito. Remember the mosquito from the original credits? The one where Dexter slaps his arm to kill it? That moment is recreated in the new opening, and then it comes back again near the end of the premiere episode. After young Dexter completes his very first kill and is disposing of the body, he slaps a mosquito off his arm and says, "I really hate mosquitoes." It's a small, subtle callback to the original title sequence that sets the tone for the entire show. This is a series that cares about the details. One of the most talked about Easter eggs in Original Sin appeared in Episode 7, titled The Joy of Killing. Eagle-eyed viewers spotted a Miami Chills ice cream truck in the background of a scene. Now, Miami Chills is the company that Brian Moser, Dexter's brother, would eventually work for as a cover when he grew up to become the ice truck killer in the original series. The truck is just there in the background, casually driving through a shot. You could watch the entire episode and never notice it. But for fans who know the significance, it's a chilling little preview of what's to come years down the line in the show's timeline. Clyde Phillips confirmed this was intentional when asked about it in an interview. There's another possible Brian Moser sighting that fans are still debating. In Episode 2, titled Kid in a Candy Store, young Dexter is sitting somewhere, maybe a cafeteria or a common area, waiting for Masuka, Batista, and a detective named Bobby Watt. A lanky, brown-haired young man approaches and asks Dexter if he can sit with him. Dexter says no, and the guy just walks away and disappears off screen. It could be nothing. It could just be a random background actor. But given the age, the physical description, and the fact that Brian Moser would have been roughly the same age as Dexter at this point in the timeline, a lot of fans believe this is a young Brian watching his brother from afar, testing whether Dexter recognizes him. The show never confirms it, which is what makes it such a perfect Easter egg. It works either way. Here's one that hits differently if you lived through the 90s. In one episode, Deb buys drugs outside of a Blockbuster video store. This works as a double Easter egg. First, it foreshadows Deb's future career in Vice, since she starts the original series as an undercover Vice officer. Second, it's just a wonderful period detail. Blockbuster Video no longer exists, and its presence here is a reminder that this is a show set in 1991, a very specific cultural moment in time. Phillips talked about how much fun the production team had with the period details, calling the show a period piece within a period piece, since they were depicting both the 90s and the 70s through Harry's backstory flashbacks. Wall phones, the first car phones, VHS tapes, mullets, the whole thing. One of the most clever Easter eggs in Original Sin happens when Deb tosses a diamond bracelet into the water after a confrontation with an ex-boyfriend. She immediately regrets it and asks if she can get it back. Dexter looks at the water and says, "Once it's in the ocean, it's gone forever." It's played as a casual, almost throwaway line, but fans know exactly what's happening in that moment. Dexter's watching something disappear beneath the surface of the ocean, never to be recovered, and you can practically see the light bulb go off in his head. This is the moment where he invents his body disposal method. The ocean as a permanent hiding place. Once it's in there, it's gone. Brilliant. The Original Sin writers also had a checklist of iconic Dexter items that needed to appear in the prequel. Phillips confirmed this in interviews. They knew they had to show Dexter getting his boat. They had to show the Henley shirt, the long-sleeve shirt that becomes Dexter's signature look in the original series. They had to show the red string that Dexter uses to map out his victims on a board. Each of these items makes its appearance across the 10-episode season, and each introduction feels organic rather than forced. It's like watching the Batman origin story, but instead of a cape and a Batmobile, you're watching a guy acquire a fishing boat and a specific style of shirt. Young Dexter's first kill in Original Sin is deliberately messy and amateur, which is itself a callback to the original series. In the original, adult Dexter occasionally reflects on his early kills and mentions that he started out very sloppy before refining his methods over time. Original Sin shows us that sloppiness firsthand. Young Dexter doesn't take a blood slide as a trophy, he takes his victim's earrings instead. He doesn't dump the body in the ocean like he will later. He wraps the body and takes it to an alligator-infested swamp where it's promptly eaten. He makes multiple mistakes, and those mistakes create consequences that ripple through the rest of the season, with the earrings ending up in Deb's hands and eventually in her friend's ears. It's a really smart way to show the character learning and evolving, while also rewarding fans who know what the finished product looks like. The original title sequence wasn't the only musical callback. There's a moment in episode 2 where Dexter gives in to his desire to kill again, and his inner monologue, voiced by Hall, says the words, "Hello darkness, my old friend." It's almost like Hall is winking at the audience through the screen. The phrase references Dexter's dark passenger, the name given to his compulsion to kill, and hearing Hall's voice deliver it in the context of a prequel after fans had been away from the character for years gives the line extra weight. It's both a greeting from the character and a greeting from the actor. Welcome back. Laguerta's characterization in Original Sin is another Easter egg playing out in slow motion. Young Laguerta, played by Christina Milian, already displays the cutthroat political instincts that define her in the original series. She's ambitious, she's strategic, she's willing to play games to advance her career. The writers made this a deliberate through line, so fans watching the prequel can see the seeds of the Laguerta, who would later become lieutenant and then captain, and who would ultimately become one of the biggest threats to Dexter's secret. It's not a visual Easter egg or a hidden number, it's a character Easter egg showing you the DNA of a person years before they fully evolve. Young Angel Batista's hair got a lot of attention from fans, and I love that this is something people actually noticed. In the original series, Angel almost always wears a hat, and when he doesn't, he's either bald or has very close cropped hair. In Original Sin, young Batista has a full head of hair under his fedora. Fans immediately started joking about an Angel's hair loss origin story. When does he lose it? Is it stress from the job? Is it age? Is it a future plot point? It's a silly detail, but it's the kind of thing that makes rewatching both shows more fun. Now let me tell you about the biggest callback in the entire prequel. Episode 8 contains a full recreation of the shipping container massacre from the original series. We talked about the container earlier in this video as the foundational moment of Dexter's origin, but Original Sin shows it in a way we've never seen before, in real time, in excruciating detail. Laura, Dexter, and Brian are ambushed by Santos Jimenez and his men. They're taken to the shipyard. They're locked in the container with other victims. And on Estrada's orders, Jimenez begins chainsawing people apart. Laura tries to cover the boy's eyes, but young Dexter watches, eyes wide open, absorbing every second. Christian Slater's Harry arrives at the scene in a police uniform, and the moment he finds young Dexter and picks him up, Slater captures the exact same look of heartbreak and horror that James Remar showed in the original series flashbacks. It doesn't matter that the actors are different. The emotion is identical. And for fans who have been watching Dexter's traumatic flashbacks for 2 decades, seeing this scene play out in full, uninterrupted detail is genuinely overwhelming. Beyond providing his iconic voice for the inner monologue, Michael C. Hall made a surprising on-camera appearance in Original Sin, connecting the prequel directly to the current franchise timeline. This was kept under wraps before the show aired and was a genuine surprise for viewers. The casting of Original Sin was itself full of fun details for fans. Sarah Michelle Gellar, best known as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, played Tanya Martin, Dexter's forensics boss. Patrick Dempsey, aka McDreamy from Grey's Anatomy, played Captain Aaron Spencer. Both are the kinds of casting choices that make you do a double take, and both actors delivered performances that fit seamlessly into the Dexter universe. And the last Easter egg in this section is one that connects original sin to resurrection in a really satisfying way. In Resurrection, which takes place in the present day, a newspaper article appears on screen that mentions the downfall of Captain Aaron Spencer. That's the character Patrick Dempsey played in Original Sin, who was never mentioned in the original series or in New Blood. This makes the Spencer article the first time that a character created exclusively for Original Sin was acknowledged in the present-day timeline, officially validating the prequel as canon within the franchise. For fans who were worried that Original Sin might be treated as a throwaway, this was a big deal. The two shows are connected. What happened in 1991 matters in the current story. Okay, we're at 50 Easter eggs now, halfway through, and if you've been drifting in and out of sleep, that's perfect. You're doing exactly what this video is designed for. Just relax, let the facts wash over you, and let me do the talking. Our next section is all about the Trinity Killer arc, which is widely considered the peak of the entire Dexter franchise. We're going to talk about some incredible details from Season 4 that even the biggest fans might have missed. Season 4 is the one, if you ask any Dexter fan to name the best season 9 out of 10 times, they're going to say Season 4, the Trinity Killer season, and the numbers back that up. The season finale, The Getaway, holds a 9.8 on IMDb. That's not just the highest rated Dexter episode. That's one of the highest rated individual episodes of any television show, period. It's up there with the best episodes of Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, and Game of Thrones. Steve Schill directed that finale, and he won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing for a drama series for his work on it. John Lithgow, who played the Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell, won both the Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actor and the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. And Michael C. Hall, as we already discussed, won the Golden Globe for Best Actor while literally undergoing cancer treatment. Season 4 was a once-in-a-lifetime collision of peak writing, peak acting, and extraordinary personal circumstances that elevated every scene into something genuinely special. But beyond the performances and the awards, Season 4 is full of fascinating story details and Easter eggs that reward careful viewers. Let's start with the biggest one, which is the ending itself. Rita Morgan, Dexter's wife, is murdered in the Season 4 finale by Arthur Mitchell. She's found dead in the bathtub, and their infant son Harrison is sitting on the floor in a pool of her blood. This image is deliberately, horrifyingly designed to mirror Dexter's own origin. Baby Dexter was found sitting in a pool of his mother's blood inside that shipping container. Now baby Harrison is found in the same situation. The cycle of violence that created Dexter has repeated itself. And Dexter's greatest fear, that his darkness would infect the people around him, has come true in the worst possible way. The writers confirmed this parallel was planned from early in the season. It wasn't a last-minute shock, it was a carefully constructed mirror that forces Dexter and the audience to confront the question of whether Harrison will grow up to be like his father. A question that wouldn't be fully answered until Dexter New Blood and Dexter Resurrection, over a decade later. Now, the writer who crafted the story of Rita's death was Scott Reynolds, who also wrote several other key episodes in the series. Reynolds was responsible for the Season 5 episode In the Beginning, where Dexter and Lumen share their first kill room, and he later became the host of the official Dexter New Blood Wrap-Up podcast, providing behind-the-scenes insights during the revival era. The fact that one writer was responsible for both the show's most devastating moment and its official companion content shows how tight-knit the creative team really was. Let's talk about the Four Walls, One Heart storyline, because it's a plot device that was way more important than most viewers realized on first watch. Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, maintained his cover as a decent person by volunteering with a charity called Four Walls, One Heart, which built homes for underprivileged families. This is how he moved from city to city without arousing suspicion. He'd show up, build some houses, gain the community's trust, and then carry out his ritual murders before moving on. But there was a darker layer. The homicide team eventually discovered that at Four Walls build sites, children's bodies were buried in the foundations. 5 days before each bathtub murder, a 10-year-old boy would go missing. Arthur was kidnapping these boys, dressing them in cowboy pajamas, calling them Arthur, and holding them in an underground bomb shelter before killing them. The kidnapping pattern wasn't discovered until Angel Batista started cross-referencing missing children reports with Trinity's known cities. It turned what seemed like a 3-kill cycle into a 4-kill cycle, adding an entirely new dimension of horror to an already terrifying villain. The bomb shelter itself is a really cool set piece. It's established in the show as a 1960s-era Cuban Missile Crisis shelter, the kind of bunker that suburban families built during the Cold War. Arthur has it set up with a model train on the floor and a record player, creating this eerie time capsule that reflects how frozen he is in his own trauma. Arthur's murders are all rooted in his childhood, specifically the day he accidentally caused his sister's death in the bathtub and then witnessed his mother's suicide. He's been repeating that trauma cycle for decades. The bomb shelter, with its vintage toys and its Cold War paranoia architecture, is a physical manifestation of a man who has never moved past his worst moment. The production design team deserves a lot of credit for that set, because it tells you everything you need to know about Arthur Mitchell without a single line of dialogue. There's a heartbreaking subplot in Season 4 involving Arthur's daughter, Christine Hill. Christine is a journalist who has been secretly feeding information to her father for years. In a pivotal scene, she reveals to Arthur that she saw him kill a woman in a bathtub when she was 5 years old. She was supposed to be waiting in the car, but she saw everything. And she thought it was a dream until it happened again in the same house 30 years later. Christine has been carrying this knowledge her entire life, and she's been collecting postcards from her father, each one sent from a city and a time that corresponds to one of his murders. It's a paper trail of death hidden inside perfectly innocent-looking vacation postcards. The detail about the postcards is one of those things that sounds almost too literary for a TV show. But it works because it underscores a central theme of Dexter. Secrets hide in plain sight. They look normal from the outside. You have to know what you're looking at to see the truth underneath. Let me give you a couple more details from the broader original series before we move on. In Season 6, there's a moment involving the character known as the Tooth Fairy Killer. His real name is Walter Kenny, and he's an elderly serial killer that Dexter tracks down. When Kenny pulls a gun on Dexter in a car, Dexter deliberately crashes the vehicle into a chain-link fence to activate the airbags, which disarms the situation. It's a small moment, but it demonstrates the kind of quick thinking and resourcefulness that Harry taught Dexter as part of the code. Dexter doesn't have superhuman strength or combat skills. He survives because he outthinks people. The airbag trick is a perfect example. There's another moment from that same storyline that has bigger implications than it seems on the surface. After Dexter kills Kenny and takes his blood slide trophy, he accidentally drops his entire blood slide box. The slides scatter and get mixed up, and Dexter can no longer match each slide to its corresponding victim. He says, "There's no order anymore." That line was written to foreshadow the chaos of the later seasons. Dexter's world, which has been so carefully controlled and organized, is starting to fall apart. His rituals are breaking down. His trophies are losing their meaning. The blood slides, which have been his most important personal artifact since Episode 1, are now just a jumbled mess. It's a quiet scene, but it's loaded with symbolism about where the character's headed. And here's one more from Season 4 that connects back to the larger franchise mythology. During the Trinity investigation, a woman named Valerie Hodges shows up at Miami Metro. Valerie was a confidential informant for Harry Morgan back in the day, and she was also romantically involved with him. In a conversation with Deborah, Valerie casually mentions that Harry dumped her for another CI. She doesn't remember the woman's name, but she says the other woman caused a scene at her house. That other CI, of course, was Laura Moser, Dexter's biological mother. This is the moment in the original series where the curtain starts to pull back on Harry's secret life, revealing that he wasn't just a good cop who adopted a troubled boy. He was deeply entangled in the circumstances that created Dexter's trauma. Valerie's throwaway comment is a tiny thread that, when pulled, unravels Harry's entire legacy. And it's a thread that Original Sin would pull much, much further. All right, 60 facts down, 40 to go. We're in the home stretch now, sort of. If you're still listening, I appreciate you. If you're asleep, sweet dreams. Let me know in the comments how far you got before drifting off. Actually, don't comment. Just sleep. You deserve it. But for those of you still hanging in there, our next section is all about the most iconic moments and memes from the series, including the most quoted line in the entire franchise and some fun casting trivia that you probably didn't know about. But before we get to those, I want to take a detour through the rest of the seasons because each season of Dexter featured a different major antagonist, what fans call the Big Bad, And each one of those villains brought their own Easter eggs, references, and hidden details to the table. And since this is a sleep video, what better way to spend the next stretch than walking through the rogues gallery of Dexter Morgan? These are the killers who defined each season and the cool details hiding behind each one. Season 1's big bad was Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, who we've talked about extensively already. Brian is Dexter's biological brother, and the entire season is essentially a love letter between two brothers who were separated by trauma and reunited by murder. The Easter eggs around Brian, the number 103, the Born Free record, the shipping container Recreations, are the foundation of the entire franchise's Easter egg tradition. Season 2 introduced the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, which is unique because the big bad of Season 2 is, in a sense, Dexter himself. The season opens with divers discovering Dexter's underwater graveyard of dismembered victims in garbage bags, triggering a massive FBI investigation led by Special Agent Frank Lundy, played by Keith Carradine. Suddenly, the entire machinery of law enforcement is focused on catching the person who dumped those bodies, and that person is sitting in the same building, analyzing blood spatter and eating donuts. The tension of Season 2 comes from Dexter trying to stay one step ahead of the investigation while simultaneously dealing with Lila West, his Narcotics Anonymous sponsor and eventual lover, who is herself deeply unstable and dangerous. There's a great Easter egg in Season 2 involving the way Dexter tries to throw the investigation off his trail. He plants evidence suggesting that Sergeant Dokes is the Bay Harbor Butcher, exploiting the fact that Dokes had a military background, a history of violence, and a personal vendetta against Dexter that looked suspicious from the outside. The frame job works, and Dokes is officially labeled the Butcher after Lila blows up the cabin where he's being held. It's a deeply ironic outcome. The one person who was right about Dexter becomes the fall guy for Dexter's crimes. And the show treats this not as a triumph, but as a tragedy, one of Dexter's darkest compromises. The audience can see the moral cost, even if Dexter can't. Lila West, played by Jamie Murray, is worth pausing on for a moment because she represents something important in the franchise. She's the first character who sees Dexter's darkness and isn't repelled by it. She's drawn to it. She wants to understand it. She wants to share in it. This dynamic would be repeated in later seasons with characters like Hannah McKay, but Lila was the original. And the show's treatment of her, as someone who is exciting and alluring but ultimately destructive, set a template that the franchise would return to again and again. There's a great detail in Lila's final episode. After being rejected by Dexter and fleeing to Paris, she's shown one last time in her apartment before Dexter tracks her down and kills her. The production design of her Paris apartment is filled with her own artwork, which is chaotic and violent and deeply personal, a visual echo of the chaos she brought into Dexter's life. It's the kind of set design detail that rewards viewers who pause and really look at what's in the frame. Season 3's big bad was Miguel Prado, played by Jimmy Smits. Miguel is an assistant district attorney who discovers Dexter's secret and wants to become his partner in vigilante killing. At first, the partnership seems ideal. Here's a respected member of the legal system who shares Dexter's frustration with criminals who escape justice. But Miguel quickly proves that he doesn't actually care about the code. He starts using Dexter's methods to eliminate political rivals and personal enemies, people who are innocent by any reasonable standard. The season is essentially about the corruption of power, showing what happens when someone with authority and ambition gets access to the tools of a serial killer without the moral framework to use them responsibly. The courtroom 103 detail that we mentioned earlier comes from this season, and it's a perfect example of how the show uses its recurring Easter eggs to add layers of meaning to otherwise simple scenes. Dexter and Miguel walking into courtroom 103 together isn't just a plot moment. It's a symbolic statement about two men entering a space defined by Dexter's original trauma, forming a partnership that is doomed to end in blood. Season 5 introduced Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles, who was nominated for a Golden Globe for the role. Lumen is a kidnapping and assault survivor who teams up with Dexter to hunt down the men who victimized her. This season is significant because it's the first time Dexter forms a genuine emotional connection with someone who understands his compulsion. Not because they share it, but because they need it. Lumen doesn't want to kill for fun. She wants justice. She wants closure. And Dexter, still reeling from Rita's murder, finds purpose in helping her achieve it. Their partnership is the healthiest relationship Dexter has ever had. which is ironic given that it revolves around murder. There's a bittersweet moment at the end of Season 5 where Lumen tells Dexter that her darkness has left her. She no longer needs to kill. And Dexter realizes with quiet devastation that his darkness will never leave him. It's one of the most emotionally honest moments in the entire series, and it's delivered without any Easter eggs or callbacks. Sometimes the best writing doesn't need hidden references. It just needs two characters telling each other the truth. Season 6 brought the Doomsday Killers, Travis Marshall, and Professor James Geller, played by Colin Hanks and Edward James Olmos. This season revolved around religious apocalyptic themes, with the killers staging elaborate tableaux based on the Book of Revelation. There's a significant twist in Season 6 that most fans either saw coming or were deeply disappointed by, depending on who you ask. Professor Geller, who appears to be the mastermind behind the killings, is revealed to have been dead the entire time. Travis has been hallucinating his presence, much like Dexter hallucinates Harry. This revelation was meant to draw a parallel between Dexter and Travis, showing that both men are guided by the ghost of a father figure. But the execution was criticized for being too predictable. The season does have one incredible Easter egg moment, though. In the Season 6 finale, Deborah walks into a church and catches Dexter in the act of killing Travis Marshall. She sees her brother, the person she trusts most in the world, standing over a dead body with a knife. That cliffhanger, Deborah discovering Dexter's secret, is rated 9.2 on IMDb and is one of the highest rated individual moments in the entire series. Season 7 dealt with the fallout of Deborah's discovery and introduced two major characters: Isaac Serko, a Ukrainian mob boss played by Ray Stevenson, and Hannah McKay, a poisoner and eventual love interest played by Yvonne Strahovski. This season is notable for being the highest rated in terms of total viewership, even though it came after the widely criticized Season 6. The show's audience had grown so large by this point that even declining critical reception couldn't slow its momentum. One cool detail from Season 7 is the way Deborah's character evolves. After discovering Dexter's secret, Deb doesn't immediately turn him in. Instead, she tries to help him, to control him, to redirect his urges. This mirrors what Harry did decades earlier, creating a disturbing parallel where Deborah becomes a new version of Harry, trying to manage a monster she loves. It's a really dark character arc that Jennifer Carpenter absolutely crushed in her performance. In Season 8, the final season under Scott Buck's leadership, brought Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist played by Charlotte Rampling, who reveals that she was involved in creating the Code of Harry. Vogel mentored Harry on how to channel Dexter's impulses, meaning she's essentially the architect of Dexter's entire moral framework. The season also introduced Zach Hamilton, the apprentice we mentioned earlier with the photography studio numbered 301. Season 8 is widely considered the weakest, but it does contain some interesting mythology additions, even if the execution didn't match the ambition. One more thing before we move on. The fan community around Dexter is one of the most dedicated and analytically obsessive fan bases in all of television. Reddit's Dexter subreddit has been active for over a decade, with fans dissecting every frame, every line, every background detail. The 103 Easter egg was first cataloged and tracked by Reddit users who noticed the number appearing in places the show never explicitly called attention to. The saber printer was spotted by a Redditor. The possible Brian Moser sighting in Original Sin was debated on Reddit for weeks. These aren't just casual viewers. These are people who watch each episode multiple times, take screenshots, compare set designs across seasons, and build theories that sometimes turn out to be more interesting than the show itself. The fact that Clyde Phillips openly acknowledged this community when he talked about Original Sin, saying there's a lot of chatter on the internet already about what we're putting in here and why, shows that the creators are aware of and actively feeding this obsessive fandom. The Easter eggs in Dexter aren't just hidden for fun, they're hidden for a community that has made finding them into an art form. Alright, that was a big detour, but I think it was worth it. Now let's get back on track with the most iconic moments and memes from the series, starting with the single most quoted line in the entire franchise, and it's "Not tonight's the night." It's not anything Dexter himself says, it comes from Sergeant James Dokes, played by Eric King, and the line is, "Surprise, motherfucker." Dokes says this to Dexter in one of their confrontations, and it became an absolute phenomenon online. It spawned thousands of meme variations, video remixes, and has been referenced in everything from Reddit comments to other television shows. The line perfectly encapsulates Doak's character, an aggressive, no-nonsense cop who suspects Dexter from the very beginning and is never afraid to get in his face about it. The irony, of course, is that Doakes was right about Dexter the entire time. He was the only person at Miami Metro who saw through the mask, and he paid for it with his life when he was framed as the Bay Harbor Butcher, and then killed by Lila West in a cabin explosion at the end of Season 2. But his line lives on, immortalized in internet culture in a way that the show's creators probably never anticipated. The second most iconic phrase from the series is Dexter's recurring inner monologue line, "Tonight's the night." He says it, or some variation of it, at the beginning of many episodes, usually while driving through Miami at night, preparing to stalk and kill his next victim. The line became so associated with the character that Showtime used it prominently in promotional materials, trailers, and marketing campaigns across all 8 seasons. It's shorthand for everything the show represents: the duality of Dexter's life, the calm before the kill, the excitement beneath the surface that he can never share with anyone. If you've ever heard someone say "tonight's the night" in a slightly ominous tone, they were probably referencing Dexter, whether they knew it or not. And then there's the dark passenger. This term, which originated in Jeff Lindsay's Dexter novels before being carried into the show, became a pop culture shorthand for hidden, violent, or destructive impulses. Dexter uses the phrase constantly to describe the force inside him that compels him to kill. It's his way of externalizing his compulsion, treating it as something separate from himself, an entity that rides along inside him rather than something that is fundamentally him. The genius of the show, especially in the later seasons, is that it gradually questions whether the dark passenger is real or whether Dexter invented it to avoid taking personal responsibility for his actions. In a conversation with the ghost of Harry in Season 8, Harry explicitly challenges this idea, suggesting that the dark passenger is no more real than he is, that it's just a coping mechanism. It's a moment of genuine psychological depth hidden inside a show about a guy who wraps people in plastic and chops them up. But the phrase itself has transcended the show. People use dark passenger casually now to describe their own hidden urges or compulsions, usually in a joking context. But the fact that it entered everyday language speaks to how deeply the show penetrated popular culture. Now let me give you some casting trivia that might surprise you. Did you know that Cody Bennett, Rita's son, was recast after Season 1? In the first season, Cody was played by a child actor named Daniel Goldman. Starting with Season 2, the role was taken over by Preston Bailey, who played Cody for the rest of the series. Most viewers never noticed the switch because Cody was so young in Season 1 that the change in appearance was easily attributable to just, a kid growing up. But it happened. Baby Harrison, Dexter and Rita's son, has an even more complicated casting history. In the early seasons, Harrison was played by twins named Luke and Evan Crunchev, which is standard practice in television for very young children because labor laws limit how long a single child can be on set. The twins carried the role through Season 7. In Season 8, a different child actor named Jaden Wells took over. And then, for Dexter New Blood and Dexter Resurrection, Harrison was recast with adult actor Jack Alcott, who portrayed the character as a young man in his early 20s. So across the franchise, Harrison has been played by at least 4 different actors, and nobody bats an eye because we're all just used to the convention of recasting child characters as they age. Here's one for the superfans. Vince Masuka, the lovably perverted forensic specialist played by C.S. Lee, was originally only a recurring character in Season 1. He wasn't part of the main cast. He'd show up for scenes in the lab, crack some inappropriate jokes, and disappear. But the character was so popular with viewers and so well performed by Lee that the producers promoted him to the main cast, starting with Season 2. From that point on, Masuka was in every episode, and he became one of the show's most consistent sources of comic relief. A similar trajectory happened with Joey Quinn, played by Desmond Harrington. Quinn was introduced as a recurring character in Season 3 and promoted to the main cast in Season 4, where he became a series regular for the rest of the run. And here's a fun detail. Masuka is one of the few characters who was present from the pilot all the way through the series finale without being killed off, written out, or significantly sidelined. He survived the entire 8-season run, which in a show where main characters die regularly is a genuine accomplishment. The character also serves an important structural function in the show's writing. Masuka provides levity in what would otherwise be an unrelentingly dark narrative. His inappropriate jokes, his awkward social interactions, and his obliviousness to the monster sitting next to him in the forensics lab create breathing room for the audience between the intense kill sequences and emotional confrontations. Without Masuka, the show would probably be too heavy to watch week after week. He's the pressure valve that keeps things manageable, and C.S. Lee deserves enormous credit for making the character feel genuine rather than like a comic relief archetype inserted for structural purposes. Speaking of characters who served structural roles, let's talk about Angel Batista for a moment. David Zayas played Angel across the entire original run, and the character evolved from a relatively straightforward detective into one of the show's most emotionally grounded figures. Angel's marriage to La Guerta, his subsequent divorce, his romance with a detective named Barbara Gianna, and his eventual suspicion of Dexter's activities all unfolded across the 8 seasons. What made Angel special was his fundamental decency. In a show populated by morally compromised characters, Angel was the one guy who was trying his best to be a good person, a good cop, and a good friend. His inability to see Dexter's true nature wasn't stupidity, it was trust. He trusted his colleague, his friend, and that trust was weaponized against him. When Zayas returned for Resurrection, the emotional weight of Angel finally confronting who Dexter really was landed with enormous impact, precisely because viewers had watched their friendship develop over nearly 2 decades of television. That's the kind of payoff that only long-running serialized storytelling can deliver. Here's a directorial fact that not many people know about. Michael C. Hall didn't just star in Dexter, he also directed an episode. His directorial debut came with the Season 8 episode titled Every Silver Lining, making him one of a relatively small group of lead actors on premium cable shows who have directed episodes of their own series. It's a notable achievement, especially considering that Hall was simultaneously carrying the weight of every single scene as the lead actor, while also managing the production as a first-time director. Let me take you back to the very beginning for a second, because the pilot episode contains a line of internal monologue that is so perfectly written, it essentially functions as the thesis statement for the entire series. As Dexter walks toward a crime scene in broad daylight Miami, his inner voice says, "There's something strange and disarming about looking at a homicide scene in the daylight of Miami. It makes the most grotesque killings look staged, like you're in a new and daring section of Disney World Dahmerland." That single line tells you everything you need to know about this character and this show. It's dark, it's funny, it's inappropriate, and it's coming from inside the mind of someone who views murder scenes the way a normal person might view a tourist attraction. The fact that this line appears within the first 10 minutes of the very first episode is a statement of intent from the writers. This is a show that will make you laugh at things you shouldn't be laughing at, and it's going to do it from the perspective of someone who genuinely cannot understand why death bothers people. The pilot's opening monologue is equally important. The show starts with Dexter saying, "My name is Dexter, Dexter Morgan. I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside. People fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well. And that's my burden, I guess." In under 30 seconds, we understand who this character is, what his problem is, and why the show is going to be interesting. He's not a mindless killer, he's a thoughtful, self-aware person who knows that something fundamental is missing inside him and has spent his entire life constructing an elaborate performance of normalcy to compensate. That monologue, delivered in Hall's calm, measured voice, is the foundation that everything else in the franchise is built on. All right, we're at 70 facts, 30 more to go. And our next section is one that I know is going to resonate with a lot of you because we're going to talk about the ending, the real ending, the Season 8 finale that broke the hearts of Dexter fans everywhere. And then we're going to talk about the comeback because as bad as that ending was, the franchise found a way to pick itself up, dust itself off, and win back a lot of the fans it had lost. So let's get into the rise, the fall, and the resurrection of Dexter Morgan. Pun very much intended. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The Season 8 finale of Dexter, titled Remember the Monsters, is one of the most hated television finales in history. And that's not hyperbole. The episode holds a rating somewhere between a 4.6 and a 4.9 on IMDb, depending on when you check. For context, the Season 4 finale that we just spent an entire section praising sits at a 9.8. That's a 5-point drop in quality between the show's best finale and its worst. Season 8 as a whole has a 35% score on Rotten Tomatoes. For additional context, Season 2, which many fans consider the second best season after Season 4, scored a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. So you're looking at a 61-point decline in critical reception between the show's peak and its nadir. Those are staggering numbers, and they reflect a show that, in the eyes of both critics and fans, completely lost its way. What happened in the finale that made people so angry? Well, here's the short version. After 8 seasons of cat-and-mouse games with law enforcement, after killing dozens of people under the Code of Harry, after losing his wife, his friends, his sister, and nearly everything else that mattered to him, Dexter's grand conclusion was to fake his own death by driving his boat, the Slice of Life, directly into a hurricane. His body was never recovered. Everyone assumed he was dead. But in the final scene of the series, we see Dexter alive, living under a new identity as a lumberjack in what appears to be the Pacific Northwest. He's grown a beard, he lives alone in a small cabin. He stares into the camera with dead eyes, and that's it. That's how the show ends. The most infamous serial killer on premium cable television became a lumberjack. No arrest, no trial, no death, no meaningful resolution to any of the emotional arcs that had been building for 8 years. Just a guy with an axe in the woods. Fans were livid. The other major source of frustration was the death of Deborah Morgan. In the final episodes, Deb is shot and suffers brain damage. She ends up on life support, and Dexter makes the decision to unplug her and dump her body in the ocean from his boat before sailing into the hurricane. So the character who had been the emotional heart of the series, the person who represented Dexter's last genuine human connection, is unceremoniously killed and then given the same burial method as Dexter's murder victims. It felt cruel and rushed, and for many fans, it was the moment where the show crossed a line from disappointing to actively offensive. The critical reception was brutal. Remember, The Monsters routinely appears on lists of the worst television finales ever made, alongside shows like Lost, How I Met Your Mother, and Game of Thrones. Multiple entertainment outlets published articles with titles like Why Dexter's Finale Was the Worst in TV History, and the backlash was so intense that it became a topic of conversation within the industry about how not to end a television series. But here's the thing, the story didn't end there. Because the backlash was so severe and so universal, it actually created the conditions for the franchise to come back. In 2021, Showtime announced Dexter: New Blood, a 10-episode limited series that would serve as a continuation of Dexter's story, set roughly a decade after the events of the finale. The show was explicitly conceived as an attempt to give fans a more satisfying conclusion to the character's journey. Clyde Phillips, the showrunner who had guided the show through its golden age in seasons 1 through 4, was brought back specifically for this purpose. Phillips had left after season 4 and had publicly expressed his own dissatisfaction with how the original series ended. Bringing him back was a signal to fans that the creative team understood what had gone wrong and was committed to fixing it. New Blood was a massive success from a viewership standpoint. It drew approximately 8 million viewers per week across all platforms, making it the most watched series in Showtime's entire history. That's an incredible number for a revival of a show that had ended on such a sour note 8 years earlier. The audience came back because they wanted closure. And New Blood, for all its own controversies regarding its finale, at least delivered a more definitive ending to Dexter's story than the lumberjack scene ever did. We already talked about how New Blood was filmed on location in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, but here's a detail we didn't cover. This was actually one of the first major productions to film under strict COVID-19 protocols, which added another layer of logistical complexity to an already ambitious project. Here's a viewership stat that surprises a lot of people. Despite the decline in quality during the later seasons, Season 7 of the original series was actually the highest-rated season in terms of total viewership. Season 7 averaged approximately 6.1 to 6.2 million total weekly viewers across all platforms, including live broadcast, on-demand viewing, and DVR playback. The Season 7 premiere alone drew 3.04 million viewers across 2 telecasts on the same night. This was the peak of Dexter as a cultural phenomenon, even if the critical consensus was already starting to wane. Now let me talk about something that happened after New Blood ended. Showtime greenlit another prequel series called Dexter Original Sin, which we've already discussed extensively. The show premiered in December of 2024 and ran for 10 episodes. Despite an earlier renewal announcement, Original Sin was canceled in August of 2025. This was a frustrating development for fans who had gotten invested in the prequels, storylines, and characters, particularly the evolving Brian Moser subplot and the Harry Morgan backstory. The cancellation left several plot threads unresolved and raised questions about how the franchise would handle the gap between the prequel timeline and the original series. But then came Dexter Resurrection. This was the big one. A new sequel series starring Michael C. Hall as Dexter Morgan, set in the present day, picking up from where New Blood left off. The premiere of Resurrection set yet another record, becoming Showtime's most streamed premiere ever on Paramount+. This franchise, which had been written off as dead after the Lumberjack finale, which had been revived once with New Blood, which had expanded backward with Original Sin, was now charging forward into entirely new territory with its lead actor back in the starring role. As of now, when you add up all the episodes across every iteration of the franchise, the Dexter universe contains a total of 126 episodes. That's 96 from the original series, 10 from New Blood, 10 from Original Sin, and 10 from the first season of Resurrection. A second season of Resurrection has been officially ordered, which means the franchise is still growing. It's a wild comeback story for a show that many people assumed was finished forever after the Lumberjack scene aired in September of 2013. That's 80 facts, 20 more to go. And if you're lying there thinking, okay, I've heard about the original series, I've heard about the prequels, I've heard about the finales, what could possibly be left? Well, let me tell you. Our next section is all about the Easter eggs hiding inside Dexter Resurrection, the newest installment in the franchise. And there are some genuinely incredible callbacks in this show that connect all the way back to the pilot episode from 2006. Plus, we've got some deep cuts from the expanded universe, including comics, video games, and a crossover with Jason Voorhees that you probably had no idea existed. Let's keep it rolling. But before we jump into Resurrection, let me share a few more things about how the franchise found its way back from the brink. Because the journey from the Lumberjack ending to Resurrection is itself a fascinating story about how television works in the streaming era. When the original series ended in 2013, the common assumption was that Dexter was done. The ending was so poorly received that it seemed like a permanent stain on the franchise. Nobody was asking for more Dexter. Nobody was petitioning for a revival. The show had burned its goodwill, and the conventional wisdom was that some things are better left alone. But then something interesting happened. Over the years that followed, Dexter didn't fade from the cultural conversation the way most shows do after a bad ending. Instead, it kept getting bigger. Social media platforms that barely existed during the show's original run, like TikTok, became breeding grounds for Dexter content. New generations of viewers discovered the show through streaming and fell in love with the early seasons. The character of Brian Moser in particular experienced a massive surge in popularity among younger viewers, who found his Season 1 arc compelling in a way that felt fresh to them. Dexter memes, particularly the Dokes surprise meme, continued to circulate years after the show ended. And the overall discourse around the show shifted from "this is over" to "what if they fix the ending?" It was in that climate that Showtime made the decision to bring the franchise back. And the key insight, the thing that made the revival work from a business perspective, was that the bad ending had actually created more demand, not less. People didn't just want more Dexter, they wanted a different ending, they wanted closure, they wanted the writers to acknowledge the mistake and try again. That desire for narrative redemption turned out to be a more powerful motivator than nostalgia alone could ever provide. New Blood wasn't just a continuation of a beloved series, it was an apology tour. And audiences showed up in record numbers because the promise wasn't just more Dexter, it was better Dexter. Whether they delivered on that promise is, as I said, a debate for another video. But the commercial success was undeniable, and it paved the way for everything that came after. Dexter Resurrection takes Dexter Morgan out of the small towns and into New York City, which is a massive shift for a character who spent his entire adult life in Miami and then spent a decade hiding in a tiny upstate New York hamlet. But the writers didn't let the change of scenery erase Dexter's history. In fact, they doubled down on connecting the new story to everything that came before. And the Easter eggs in Resurrection are some of the most satisfying in the entire franchise. Let's start with the new serial killer that Dexter encounters in New York. This villain literally goes by the name the Dark Passenger. Think about that for a second. For 8 seasons, the Dark Passenger was Dexter's private, internal term for his compulsion to kill. Nobody else used it. Nobody else even knew about it. It was the most intimate piece of his psychological vocabulary. And now, in Resurrection, someone has taken that name and is using it as a public identity. A serial killer in New York City has co-opted Dexter's own terminology, and Dexter has to confront this twisted version of his inner world made external. It's a meta-narrative device that works on multiple levels. For Dexter, it's personal. For the audience, it's a callback to over a decade of storytelling. And as a story device, it forces Dexter to reckon with the fact that his influence, the dark philosophy he lived by in secret, has somehow leaked into the world. One of the most specific Easter eggs in Resurrection involves how Dexter kills a character named Ron Schmidt. Ron is a vigilante killer targeting rideshare drivers because his father, a taxi medallion owner, lost his livelihood when companies like Car, the show's fictionalized version of Uber, made traditional taxis obsolete. Ron's father was so devastated that he jumped into the East River and took his own life. The dredger that found the body accidentally decapitated him, which traumatized Ron into becoming a killer who decapitates his victims. Now here's the Easter egg. The way Dexter catches and subdues Ron deliberately echoes the very first kill we ever saw in the pilot episode. Back in 2006, Dexter caught a choirmaster named Mike Donovan by hiding in the back seat of his station wagon, then looping a wire around his neck and forcing him to drive to a pre-prepared kill room. In Resurrection, Dexter uses a strikingly similar approach with Ron. The methodology mirrors the pilot almost beat for beat. It's the show telling longtime fans, this is the same Dexter you fell in love with 19 years ago. His methods haven't changed, his instincts are the same, he's still the guy in the back seat. Now let's talk about Brian Moser's return, because this was a huge moment. In the Season 1 finale of Resurrection, Christian Camargo reprises his role as Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother and the ice truck killer. Of course, Brian has been dead since the Season 1 finale of the original series, when Dexter slit his throat and staged it as a suicide. So Brian's appearance in Resurrection is as a vision inside Dexter's mind, similar to how Harry's ghost has appeared throughout the franchise. But Brian's dialogue is loaded with callbacks and Easter eggs that go deep into franchise history. Brian's opening line to Dexter is, "Oops, you did it again." On the surface, it's a darkly playful reference to the Britney Spears song from 2000. But underneath that, it's a cutting reminder that Dexter has once again caused the death of someone he cared about. Angel Batista, Dexter's longtime colleague and friend, dies in the Resurrection finale, and Brian is essentially rubbing salt in the wound. Brian then goes after the foundation of Dexter's entire existence, the Code of Harry. He argues that Dexter is still listening to a fake dad instead of his actual brother, his blood. He reminds Dexter of the Season 1 finale Born Free, when Brian offered him a life free from the code, free from Harry's rules, free to be who they really are. Dexter rejected that offer and killed Brian instead. And now, decades later, Brian's ghost is still asking the same question. What if you'd chosen differently? There's a physical Easter egg in Brian's vision scene that is absolutely spine-tingling. At one point, Dexter grabs a rusty chainsaw and hurls it at Brian to drive him away. The chainsaw is a direct callback to the shipping container massacre, the scene where their mother Laura was murdered with a chainsaw in front of both boys. By throwing the chainsaw at Brian, Dexter is symbolically rejecting the temptation to embrace his darkest self. He's throwing away the weapon that created them both. It's an incredibly layered piece of visual storytelling, and it only works if you know the full history of what the chainsaw represents in this franchise. During that same confrontation, Dexter says the line, "I'm glad I killed you when I had the chance." And hardcore fans immediately recognized this as a direct quote from Season 4, Episode 9, when Dexter said the same thing to Arthur Mitchell during a heated confrontation. The writers recycled a line from the Trinity Killer era and put it in a completely different context, aimed at a different character, and it still works perfectly. That's the benefit of having a showrunner in Clyde Phillips, who was there for both the original Golden Age and the new era. He knows which lines resonate and how to redeploy them for maximum impact. Resurrection also features a villain named Leon Prater, a billionaire who has created a secret club for serial killers. essentially monetizing and protecting them. Prater keeps a murder museum in his compound, filled with memorabilia from famous serial killers. And for Dexter fans, the museum is a treasure trove because it contains nostalgic reminders of Dexter's old adversaries from the original series. It's essentially a set designed to trigger memories for longtime viewers, and it functions as a physical Easter egg gallery within the show itself. David Zayas reprises his role as Angel Batista in Resurrection, and this is significant because it closes a character arc that spans roughly 20 real-world years. Angel has been part of the franchise since the pilot episode. He's been Dexter's colleague, his friend, and at times an unwitting obstacle in Dexter's double life. Seeing Zayas back in the role, older, wiser, and now confronting the truth about who Dexter really is brings an enormous amount of emotional weight to Resurrection. It's one of those casting decisions that only works because the franchise has existed long enough for the passage of real time to mirror the passage of story time. The casting of Resurrection also brought in some major new talent. Peter Dinklage, best known as Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, joined the cast in a significant role, representing the biggest casting get the franchise has had since John Lithgow joined Season 4. Uma Thurman also appears as a character named Charlie Brown. These high-profile additions signal that the franchise is not coasting on nostalgia. It's investing in the future with actors who bring their own fan bases and their own gravity to the material. The setting change to New York City in Resurrection deserves its own mention because it fundamentally alters the DNA of the show in a way that earlier installments didn't. For 8 seasons, Dexter's world was defined by Miami's bright sunshine, pastel colors, and coastal atmosphere. The irony of a serial killer operating in paradise was baked into the show's visual identity. New Blood moved the setting to a small, snowy New England town, which created a completely different mood, more isolated, more claustrophobic, more gothic. But Resurrection goes in yet another direction by placing Dexter in the biggest, most anonymous city in America. New York City is a place where millions of people live on top of each other, and yet nobody knows their neighbors. For a character who has spent his entire life hiding in plain sight, it's the ultimate testing ground. Can Dexter maintain his facade in a city that moves too fast to notice anything? Can he hunt in a place with this many eyes, this many cameras, this many potential witnesses? The writers used the setting brilliantly, turning the chaos and density of New York into both a shield and a threat for Dexter. He can disappear into a crowd more easily than he ever could in Miami. But the sheer volume of people also means more chances for someone to see something they shouldn't. There's also a fascinating element in Resurrection involving Dexter's relationship with his son Harrison, played again by Jack Alcott. The Harrison storyline picks up the thread established in New Blood, where Harrison discovered his father's secret and seemed to be developing his own dark tendencies. In Resurrection, the question of whether Harrison has inherited Dexter's dark passenger becomes a central tension. Is the cycle going to repeat for a third generation? We saw it begin with Brian and Dexter, 2 brothers born in blood. We saw it threaten Harrison when he was left in a pool of Rita's blood as an infant, mirroring Dexter's own origin. And now, in Resurrection, the show has to decide whether Harrison will follow in his father's footsteps or break free. It's the emotional through line that gives the franchise its deepest resonance, the idea that trauma is hereditary, that violence begets violence, and that the sins of the father are visited upon the son. The fact that this thread has been running continuously from the Season 4 finale in 2009 all the way through Resurrection in 2025, a span of 16 real-world years, is extraordinary serialized storytelling. And the last Resurrection Easter egg I want to highlight brings us full circle to where this entire video began. In the Season 1 finale of Resurrection, Dexter needs to crack the code to Leon Prater's vault, and his instinct is to try a date, a death date. Because Dexter knows from personal experience that there are certain dates you can never forget, dates that shape who you are at the deepest level. For Leon, the vault code is tied to the death of someone he lost, someone whose memory he can't escape. And for Dexter, the date that defined everything was October 3rd, 1973. 103, the number that has haunted him since Season 1. The number Brian used to wake up his brother's repressed memories. The number that appeared on hotel doors and courtroom plaques and radio dials. The writers brought the 103 Easter egg into Resurrection not as a direct repetition, but as a thematic echo. Dexter recognizes the psychology of a man haunted by a date because he is that man. The number is different, but the trauma is the same. It's a beautiful piece of symmetry that connects the newest episode of the franchise to the very first season 19 years apart. All right, we're at 90, 10 more to go. We're almost home. But before I get to the final 10, I want to take one last extended pause to talk about something that I think is really important. And that's the broader impact of Dexter on television as a medium, because this show didn't just tell a great story, it changed the way stories were told. And understanding that context makes the final stretch of Easter eggs and facts hit even harder. When Dexter premiered on Showtime in October of 2006, the television landscape was in the middle of a transformation. The Sopranos had already proven that a cable drama about a morally compromised protagonist could become a cultural event. Breaking Bad was still 2 years away. Mad Men had just debuted a few months earlier. And into this environment walked a show that asked audiences to do something that even The Sopranos hadn't fully attempted. It asked them to root for an active serial killer, not a mob boss who occasionally ordered hits, not a meth cook who gradually lost his soul, a serial killer, a man who stalked, drugged, wrapped in plastic, stabbed, and dismembered other human beings on a regular basis. And the show made it work. It made you like him. It made you worry about him getting caught. It made you feel relieved when he successfully killed his targets and disposed of the evidence. That was an extraordinary achievement in terms of writing, performance, and audience psychology. The reason it worked, and this is something that gets discussed in television studies programs now, is that the show gave Dexter a moral framework that the audience could latch onto. The Code of Harry provides rules. Dexter only kills people who have killed others and escaped justice. He verifies their guilt before acting. He plans meticulously to avoid harming innocents. He never kills children. These rules create the illusion of ethical behavior within a fundamentally unethical context, and they allow the audience to tell themselves that what Dexter is doing is, if not good, at least understandable. The show is essentially a thought experiment about whether a person can do terrible things for arguably good reasons and still deserve our empathy. And the answer, based on the show's massive popularity, is that audiences absolutely wanted to engage with that question. Dexter opened the floodgates for what would become the golden age of the television anti-hero. Walter White in Breaking Bad, Joe Goldberg in You, Villanelle in Killing Eve. All of these characters owe a debt to Dexter Morgan for proving that audiences were ready to follow a protagonist who does genuinely awful things. The show's influence extends beyond just the anti-hero trend. Dexter also popularized a specific narrative structure that has been widely adopted. The idea of a seasonal big bad, a single antagonist whose arc spans an entire season and forces the protagonist to confront a specific aspect of their own nature, became a template that dozens of shows have since followed. Each of Dexter's seasonal villains was designed to mirror or challenge some aspect of Dexter's character. The ice truck killer forced him to confront his family. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation forced him to confront his mortality. Miguel Prado forced him to confront the corrupting nature of power. The Trinity Killer forced him to confront fatherhood. Lumen Pierce forced him to confront intimacy. Each season was structured as a thematic argument between Dexter and his nemesis, with the audience caught in the middle. This structure, which the show refined over its first 4 seasons, has become so common in prestige television that it's now considered standard practice. But Dexter was one of the shows that proved it could work on a seasonal basis. Let me also talk about some of the most memorable kills in the series, because the kill room scenes are a huge part of what made the show iconic, and each one has its own hidden details and Easter eggs. Dexter's standard procedure involves drugging his victim with M99, the animal tranquilizer that he uses Patrick Bateman's name to acquire. He then wraps the kill room in plastic sheeting, creating a sterile, contained environment where he can work without leaving evidence. The victim wakes up strapped to a table, unable to move, and Dexter shows them photos of their own victims before delivering the fatal blow, usually a stab to the chest. He then dismembers the body and dumps the pieces in the ocean from his boat. This ritual is repeated dozens of times across the series, but the show finds ways to vary it each time. Sometimes the victim breaks free. Sometimes Dexter has to improvise. Sometimes the emotional context changes the feel of the entire scene. The kill of Arthur Mitchell in the season 4 finale is notably different from Dexter's usual method. There's no theatricality, no long monologue. Dexter simply confronts Arthur, tells him that it's over, and kills him. The stripped-down nature of that kill reflects the weight of what Arthur has taken from Dexter. Rita is dead. The game is no longer fun. The ritual has lost its meaning. It's one of the most powerful kills in the entire series precisely because it's so understated. Another memorable kill is the very first one we ever see, the murder of Mike Donovan in the pilot. This scene set the template for every kill that would follow. Dexter hides in the backseat of Donovan's car, subdues him, and takes him to an abandoned pump house where he's laid out photos of 3 young boys that Donovan has murdered. Donovan can't even look at the photos. Dexter forces him to see what he's done before ending his life. The scene establishes that Dexter's kills aren't random acts of violence. They're structured rituals with a moral component. The victim must confront their crimes. They must see the faces of the people they've harmed. And then, only then, does Dexter deliver justice. It's a twisted version of a courtroom proceeding, with Dexter serving simultaneously as judge, jury, and executioner. The pilot kill is so well constructed that it was essentially replicated, as we discussed, in Resurrection's Ron Schmidt kill nearly 2 decades later. The franchise bookended itself with the same methodology, creating a circle that connects the first episode to the most recent one. The music of Dexter deserves a longer conversation than most people give it. Daniel Licht, who composed the score for the entire original series and New Blood, created something genuinely unique. His compositions blend Latin rhythms, eerie string arrangements, and minimalist electronic textures into a sound that is immediately identifiable as Dexter. The main score cue, a soft, almost childlike melody played on what sounds like a toy piano, underscores many of Dexter's internal monologue scenes. It's deceptively innocent, which is exactly the point. The music sounds like it belongs in a children's show, but it's playing over scenes where a man is planning murder. That contrast between the score's sweetness and the content's darkness is a microcosm of the entire show. Licht understood that Dexter isn't a horror show. It's a show about a monster who thinks he's a person, and the music reflects that self-perception. When Dexter is happy, the music is warm and inviting. When he's conflicted, the music becomes uncertain and fragmented. The score isn't telling you what you should feel, it's telling you what Dexter feels. And since Dexter's emotional reality is fundamentally distorted, the music becomes an unreliable narrator in its own right. After Licht passed away, Pat Irwin took over composing duties for Resurrection, and while Irwin's work is competent and respectful of the established sound, fans have noted that something indefinable was lost in the transition. Licht's score was so woven into the DNA of the show that replacing it, even with skilled work, felt like a different show wearing the same clothes. One more piece of cultural context before we get to the final 10. The streaming history of Dexter is itself a reflection of how the entertainment industry changed over the franchise's lifetime. When the show premiered in 2006, streaming barely existed. People watched Dexter on Showtime's cable channel, or they rented the DVDs from Netflix's mail-order service. As we mentioned earlier, Dexter was at one point the most rented DVD box set in Netflix history. But as streaming evolved, the show migrated to digital platforms. For years, all 8 seasons were available on Netflix's streaming service, which introduced the show to millions of new viewers who hadn't watched it during its original run. Netflix was arguably responsible for Dexter's second wave of popularity, the wave that eventually made New Blood possible. But in June of 2025, Dexter was removed from Netflix and consolidated under Paramount Plus with Showtime, where it currently lives alongside New Blood, Original Sin, and Resurrection. The show has essentially traveled the entire arc of modern media distribution, from premium cable to physical media, to streaming to platform consolidation, touching every major format along the way. It's like a fossil record of how we've consumed television over the past 2 decades. There's also the fascinating evolution of how Dexter was consumed by audiences over the years. All right, now I really am taking you to the final 10. Fact number 91. The entire Dexter television franchise is based on a series of novels by author Jeff Lindsay. The first book, Darkly Dreaming Dexter, was published in 2004, 2 years before the show premiered on Showtime. And here's what a lot of people don't realize. Only the first season of the show follows the book. Season 1 adapts the general storyline of darkly dreaming Dexter, including the ice truck killer mystery and the reveal that Brian Moser is Dexter's brother. But after that, the show went in a completely different direction. Season 2 onwards is entirely original storytelling created by the TV writers, with no connection to the subsequent novels. Jeff Lindsay went on to write 7 more Dexter books, and they diverge wildly from the show. In the novels, Dexter's dark passenger is treated as a literal supernatural entity, almost like a demon that lives inside him, which is a very different interpretation from the show's more psychological approach. The novels also include storylines where Dexter's stepchildren, Cody and Astor, begin showing their own dark tendencies, and Dexter starts training them in the code. That never happens in the show. So if you've watched the entire TV series and think you know the Dexter story, the books offer a completely alternate version of the same character that goes in some genuinely weird and unexpected directions. Fact number 92. Marvel Comics published an official Dexter comic book series. This is one of those facts that sounds made up, but it's completely real. In 2013, Marvel released a comic series simply titled Dexter, written by Jeff Lindsay himself. They also published a related series called Dexter Down Under. The comics were set in the same universe as the novels, not the television show, so they followed Lindsay's version of the character rather than the Showtime version. The art style was dark and moody, fitting for the subject matter, and the stories explored Dexter operating in environments outside of Miami. Having Marvel, the company behind Spider-Man and the Avengers, publish a comic about a serial killer who wraps his victims in plastic and dismembers them with a bone saw is a genuinely surreal piece of pop culture history. It's not like this was a small indie publisher. This was Marvel, the same Marvel that Disney would later acquire. Try explaining that publishing decision to someone who only knows Marvel from the MCU, fact number 93. And this is probably the wildest piece of expanded universe trivia I'm going to share tonight. There exists in actual published print a comic book crossover titled Dexter vs. Jason vs. Hackslash. Yes, you read that right. Dexter Morgan, the vigilante serial killer from Showtime, crosses over with Jason Voorhees, the undead slasher from the Friday the 13th franchise, and the characters from the indie comic series Hackslash. This is a real thing that was produced and sold in stores. It's not canon to the television series, obviously, but it exists as part of the broader Dexter comic universe. The premise brings together 3 very different types of killers: a methodical code-following killer, a supernatural unstoppable force, and the monster-hunting protagonists of Hackslash, and forces them into the same story. It's completely bonkers, and the fact that it was officially licensed makes it one of the strangest footnotes in the Dexter franchise. If you ever want to see Dexter Morgan try to apply the Code of Harry to Jason Voorhees, apparently that's something you can read. I don't know how you'd even begin to get Jason on the table. The guy doesn't stay dead, but someone thought it was a good idea, and honestly, I kind of respect the audacity. Fact number 94. Official Dexter video games exist. There were mobile and console titles released during the show's run that allowed players to step into Dexter's shoes, investigating crime scenes and stalking victims. One of these games, called Dexter the Game 2, was available on the Amazon App Store and mobile platforms. The games weren't blockbuster releases by any stretch, but they were officially licensed products that expanded the Dexter experience into interactive media. The gameplay typically involved examining evidence, following leads, and ultimately cornering targets, all while maintaining Dexter's cover identity. They were pretty basic by modern gaming standards, but for Dexter fans in the early 2010s who wanted to experience the character's world beyond the TV screen, they were a fun novelty. The idea of a serial killer simulation game being sold on mainstream app stores is another one of those things that probably wouldn't fly today without significant controversy, but at the peak of Dexter's cultural popularity, nobody seemed to bat an eye. Fact number 95. The character of Dexter Morgan was indirectly inspired by a real person. According to documented production history, the concept of a serial killer, who exclusively targets other criminals, was influenced by the case of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, also known as Pedrinho Matador, a Brazilian serial killer who is reported to have murdered dozens of people, almost all of whom were themselves criminals. Filho targeted drug dealers, gang members, and murderers, operating with a twisted sense of justice that bears obvious parallels to Dexter's Code of Harry. Filho killed the men he held responsible for his father's imprisonment. He killed fellow inmates in prison, and he became something of a folk hero in certain parts of Brazil because his victims were almost universally people that society had failed to punish through the legal system. The parallel to Dexter is clear. Both are killers who frame themselves as necessary evils, doing the work that the justice system is unable or unwilling to do. Obviously, the show's version is highly fictionalized and dramatized, but knowing that the character's conceptual DNA traces back to a real person adds an interesting layer to the franchise. It blurs the line between fiction and reality in a way that makes Dexter's moral complexity feel even more relevant. Okay, we're in the final 5. Facts 96 through 100, the last stretch. If you're still awake, you have incredible stamina. Genuinely impressive. If you fell asleep a while ago and this is just washing over you like background noise, that's the dream, literally. But either way, these last 5 facts are about the show's legacy, its place in television history, and a couple of final details that I think are the perfect way to end this thing. Before we get into the final 5, though, let me give you one more expanded universe detail that's too interesting to skip. During the show's original run, Showtime produced official companion content beyond just the episodes themselves. There were extensive special features on the DVD and Blu-ray releases, including behind-the-scenes documentaries, cast interviews, and in-depth looks at the production process. The collector's edition box sets were particularly noteworthy because they came packaged in that distinctive wooden slide box design I mentioned earlier, which was modeled after Dexter's actual Bloodslide collection. If you were a fan who bought the box set, you were essentially keeping your DVDs in a replica of a serial killer's trophy case, which is a very on-brand piece of merchandise design when you think about it. There were also multiple soundtrack albums released featuring Daniel Licht's score. Licht's music is one of those elements of the show that doesn't get nearly enough recognition. His compositions blended Latin-influenced percussion, eerie ambient textures, and occasionally haunting melodies to create a soundscape that was completely unique to Dexter. You can put on a Licht track without any visual context and immediately know it's from this show. The music does so much heavy lifting in establishing mood, especially in the quiet moments between kills when Dexter is navigating his everyday life. Licht scored the original 8 seasons and New Blood, and his passing was a genuine loss for the franchise. When Pat Irwin took over composing duties for Resurrection, he had enormous shoes to fill. And the transition in musical style is one of those subtle differences that longtime fans notice immediately. The show's cultural impact extended well beyond entertainment into academic circles as well. Dexter has been the subject of numerous academic papers, university courses, and critical essays examining its themes of morality, justice, psychopathy, and the ethics of audience identification with a protagonist who commits serial murder. The show raised genuine philosophical questions about whether vigilante justice can ever be moral, about the nature of psychopathy versus sociopathy, and about the limits of audience empathy. Can you root for a character who does objectively terrible things if those things serve a perceived greater good? At what point does sympathetic portrayal become endorsement? These are questions that philosophy and media studies departments have been wrestling with since the show premiered, and they remain relevant today as more shows continue to feature morally complex anti-heroes. Dexter didn't invent the anti-hero on television. Tony Soprano got there first. But Dexter pushed the concept further than anyone had before by making its protagonist not just morally questionable, but an active serial killer. The gap between Tony Soprano and Dexter Morgan is the difference between a bad person who sometimes does good things and a person who literally murders people on a regular basis while the audience cheers. That's a significant escalation, and the fact that the show pulled it off successfully for at least 4 seasons is a genuine achievement in television writing. Fact number 96. By the time Dexter finished its original run in 2013, the franchise had accumulated over 100 award nominations and had won approximately 32 awards across major and minor ceremonies. That includes 4 Emmy wins, 2 Golden Globe wins, a Peabody Award, recognition from the American Film Institute, and nominations from the Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild of America, the Television Critics Association, the Saturn Awards, the Satellite Awards, and the Producers Guild, among others. For a show on a premium cable network that was, at its core, about a sympathetic serial killer, that level of industry recognition is extraordinary. It means that even the people who make television, the actors, directors, writers, and producers who vote in these awards, looked at Dexter and said, "This is some of the best work being done on the medium." The show wasn't just popular with audiences, it was respected by its peers. Fact number 97. Dexter made history for Showtime in a way that is often overlooked. The series was Showtime's first ever drama to receive a nomination for Outstanding Drama Series at the Primetime Emmy Awards. Not just a nomination for acting or directing or design, but for the show itself as a whole, competing against the best dramas on television. And it didn't just happen once. Dexter was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series 4 consecutive years, from Season 2 through Season 5. It never won, but the fact that it was consistently recognized alongside shows like Mad Men, Breaking Bad, and Lost speaks to the quality of its early seasons. Before Dexter, Showtime was known primarily for comedies like Weeds and Californication. Dexter put the network on the map as a destination for prestige drama, paving the way for later hits like Homeland, Billions, and Yellow Jackets. Without Dexter's success, Showtime's entire identity as a network might look very different today. Fact number 98. That opening title sequence we talked about earlier, the one where Dexter's morning routine is filmed like a horror movie, with extreme close-ups of him slicing a blood orange, cracking an egg, tying his shoes, and flossing his teeth, all set to Rolf Kent's macabre theme music, won the Emmy for Outstanding Main Title Design in 2007. It's one of the most iconic opening sequences in television history, right up there with The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, and Breaking Bad. What makes it so effective is the double meaning embedded in every shot. A man cooking breakfast looks normal from a distance, but when you film it the way director Marco Siega and the title design team did, with tight framing, aggressive editing, and a score that sounds like something out of a David Lynch film, suddenly the mundane becomes menacing. You see Dexter press down on a blood orange and the juice oozes out like a wound. You see him cinch a knot in his shoelaces and it looks like he's tying a ligature around someone's neck. You see him smile at the camera in the final frame and it looks like the last thing you'd ever see. Every single shot is designed to make the ordinary look dangerous, which is exactly what Dexter Morgan does every day of his life. The title sequence isn't just an introduction to the show, it's a thesis statement about the character, delivered without a single word of dialogue. Fact number 99, the Dexter franchise has been cited in multiple real-world criminal cases. Over the years, several perpetrators have claimed to have been directly inspired by Dexter Morgan's methodology. Reports have documented killers who used plastic wrap to restrain victims, who dismembered bodies and disposed of them in water, and who invoked the concept of a personal code to justify their actions. This is one of the more uncomfortable aspects of the show's legacy. On one hand, Dexter was a groundbreaking piece of television that pushed the boundaries of what premium cable could accomplish in terms of storytelling, character complexity, and moral ambiguity. On the other hand, the show's central premise, that a serial killer can be sympathetic and even heroic if he kills the right people, clearly resonated with certain individuals in deeply unhealthy ways. The show pioneered the morally ambiguous anti-hero on television and paved the way for characters like Walter White in Breaking Bad and Joe Goldberg in You. But it also raised legitimate questions about the social responsibility of media that asks audiences to root for a murderer. This tension between artistic achievement and real-world impact is something that the franchise has never fully resolved, and it probably never will. It's a debate that will follow Dexter for as long as people are talking about television. And now, fact number 100, the last one. And I wanted to save this one for the end because I think it brings everything we've talked about tonight full circle in a really beautiful way. Throughout this video, we started with the number 103, October 3rd, 1973, the day Laura Moser's murder was reported, the day Dexter's Dark Passenger was born. We traced that number through hotel rooms and courtrooms and Bible passages and radio stations and photography studios and vault combinations across 8 seasons of the original series, through New Blood, through Original Sin, and into Resurrection. We watched it evolve from a plot device in Season 1 to a franchise-wide Easter egg that spans nearly 20 years of television. And what I want to leave you with is the idea that this single number represents everything that makes Dexter special as a piece of storytelling. Most shows have Easter eggs. Most shows hide little references and callbacks for dedicated fans to find. But very few shows have a single recurring symbol that carries the emotional weight of the entire narrative. 103 isn't just a number, it's a scar. It's the moment where two little boys lost their mother and lost their innocence and were set on paths that would define the rest of their lives. Every time that number appears on screen, whether the characters acknowledge it or not, it's the show reminding us of where Dexter came from, of what made him, of the original sin that created the Bay Harbor butcher, the loving father, the forensic analyst, the monster, the man. All of those versions of Dexter Morgan trace back to a cargo container on a loading dock in 1973. And the number 103 is the show's way of making sure we never forget that. The Dexter franchise, across its 126 episodes and counting, has given us some of the most complex television ever made. It introduced a serial killer as a protagonist and dared us to care about him. It gave us John Lithgow's Trinity Killer, one of the greatest villains in TV history. It gave us the worst finale in TV history and then came back and tried to make it right. It generated memes that have outlived the show itself. It inspired comic books and video games and academic papers and criminal investigations. It won Peabody Awards and Golden Globes, and it lost Emmys that it probably deserved to win. It was filmed in Long Beach pretending to be Miami. It was scored by a composer who gave it a sound unlike anything else on television. And through all of it, from the pilot to resurrection, 103 was always there, hiding in plain sight, waiting to be noticed, just like Dexter himself. So that's 100 Dexter Easter eggs and facts. If you made it through all of them, I genuinely want to congratulate you because that was a marathon. And if you fell asleep somewhere around fact 30 or 40 or 60, I hope it was a good sleep. I hope my voice was gentle enough to carry you there. That's the whole point of this. Not every video has to be high energy and fast-paced and screaming at you to smash the like button. Sometimes you just want someone to talk to you about something you love while you drift off. And if Dexter's something you love, I hope tonight felt like a warm blanket of nerdy, deeply researched appreciation for one of the most unique shows ever put on television. If you enjoyed this, or if you fell asleep to it, which counts as enjoyment in my book, please consider subscribing. I put a lot of time and research into these videos. I'm talking about reading through plot summaries of 126 episodes, cross-referencing Easter eggs with multiple sources, verifying every fact against documented production history. This is a labor of love, and I'd love to keep making these for you. So hit that subscribe button if you want more, and if you want to fall asleep to another one of these tomorrow night, check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty. But for now, I think it's time to close your eyes. You've earned it. You just sat through or slept through 100 facts about a fictional serial killer, and somehow that was a relaxing experience. If that doesn't prove that Dexter Morgan is the most fascinating character in television history, I don't know what does. So good night, sleep well, and remember, tonight's the night. Tonight's the night you finally get some rest. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this show as much as I do. And if you want more of these long, cozy, deeply researched deep dives into the shows and stories you love, this channel is the place. We do this regularly, we go deep, we go slow. And we always make sure you have something interesting to fall asleep to. So subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Or I won't see you because you'll be asleep, which again is the whole point. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Good night.